If you enjoy these deep dives into history, please consider following this channel for more stories from the veiled world of intelligence. We appreciate your support. The air in Arlington, Virginia, was thick with humidity and suspicion in the summer of 1983. The nation was coiled, listening to the rhetoric of an evil empire and the quiet, pervasive fear of nuclear annihilation. It was the era of the Second Cold War, a time when the conflict had moved beyond grand strategy and deep into the mundane details of suburban life. In the leafy, manicured enclaves just across the Potomac from Washington, D.C., neighbors were cordial, lawns were impeccable, and the true currency was the federal security clearance. In this environment, Michael Vaughn was a model citizen. He lived in a modest but comfortable split-level home on a quiet cul-de-sac. He drove a gray Ford sedan. He was a systems analyst for a mid-level defense contractor, Dynatech Solutions, a company that held significant, if unglamorous, contracts with the Department of the Navy. Vaughn was unremarkable in the best possible way. He was married to a quiet, pleasant woman named Helen, who volunteered at the local library. They had no children, which they vaguely explained away with a quiet, polite sadness that discouraged further inquiry. Michael Vaughn was, to his colleagues, a solid guy. He was in his late 40s, his hair just beginning to thin, his posture slightly stooped. He was a man of precise habits. He arrived at his cubicle at 7:52 a.m., took lunch precisely at 12:15 p.m., always a sandwich eaten at his desk, and left at 5:03 p.m. His one minor, observable vice was his smoking. He was a steady, almost rhythmic chain smoker of Marlboro Reds. The scent clung to his slightly too large blazers. He took his smoke breaks alone, standing by the loading dock, cupping the cigarette in a way that seemed less American, more European, though no one ever registered the detail. Across the river, in the sterile, sprawling complex at Langley, Arthur Donnelly pushed paper. Donnelly was a career man in the CIA's counterintelligence staff. He was a product of the old school, a man who had survived the purges and paranoia of the Angleton era by being meticulously, agonizingly thorough. He was not a field man, he was a reader. He read files, reports, transcripts, and, most importantly, the spaces between the lines. He believed the agency had become too reliant on satellites and signals intelligence. He believed the real threat was human, the illegal agent, the deep-cover operative living a manufactured life. Donnelly was assigned to clean house on the contractor side. The sheer volume of sensitive data flowing through third-party companies like Dynatech was a hemorrhage. Donnelly was tasked with reviewing the security files of all analysts with sensitive compartmented information, SCI access. It was a tedious, bureaucratic punishment for a man who had, one too many times, suggested his superiors were missing the big picture. In August 1983, the file for Michael Vaughn landed on his desk. It was a thick, heavy folder, but the contents were sparse. A birth certificate from Columbus, Ohio. A degree from Ohio State University. A clean, unremarkable employment history. A perfect credit report. It was, in every technical respect, a flawless file. Arthur Donnelly looked at the file, then looked out his window at the Virginia woods and felt a familiar, cold knot of professional dread. The file wasn't just clean. It was sterile. It lacked the messy, contradictory, inconvenient details of a real human life. The investigation did not begin with a bang. It began with a notation. In the margin of the Vaughn file review sheet, Donnelly wrote a single, ambiguous note. Requires longitudinal verification. It was bureaucratic language for, I don't trust this. He did not, at this stage, have the authority or the evidence to open a formal investigation. He was merely a file reader, and he knew his superiors, eager to embrace the new tech-heavy, fast-moving era of the 80s, had little patience for his Angleton-esque hunches. Donnelly began his own quiet inquiry using the slow, patient methods of his trade. He started not with Vaughn, but with the legend itself. He requisitioned old yearbooks from Ohio State University, 1968. There he was, Michael Vaughn, a face in a crowd of grainy black and white photos, a member of the chess club. It was a good legend, professionally crafted, but Donnelly was looking for the errors. He cross-referenced the addresses listed in the file. The apartment Vaughn supposedly rented in Columbus during college had been a laundromat until 1970. A minor discrepancy, building records were often wrong. He looked at Vaughn's Social Security number, issued in Ohio in the late 1960s, a new number for an adult. This was a known tactic for illegals who adopted the identity of a deceased individual who had never applied for a number. But Vaughn's legend was better than that. His identity was clean. The real anomaly was the lack of anomalies. Vaughn had no outstanding parking tickets. He had no late library books. He had never had a dispute with a neighbor that involved the police. In 20 years of his documented American life, Michael Vaughn had left no administrative footprints of anger, passion, or error. He was a statistical ghost. Donnelly, working late one Tuesday, smoking his own pipe, a mild, aromatic Cavendish, stared at the photograph of Vaughn from his Dynatech security badge. The man looked tired. He looked bored. He looked, Donnelly thought, like a man playing a very long, very tedious part. On a hunch, Donnelly pulled the raw data from Vaughn's last routine polygraph, the one he had passed without incident. The questions were standard. Have you had unauthorized contact with a foreign national? Have you ever removed classified material from this facility? The baseline was clean. The responses were calm. But Donnelly looked at the chart for the control questions. Is the sky blue? Are you sitting in a chair? The physiological response to these simple factual questions was identical to his response to the security questions. There was no variance. It was the polygraph of a man with absolute, almost sociopathic control. Or, Donnelly considered, the polygraph of a man who had been trained intensively to defeat the machine. He put in a request with the FBI, a simple cross-reference. He knew the Bureau was territorial, but he had a few old contacts. Just run the name Michael Vaughn, Ohio, 1945-1950, against any old counterintelligence files. Nothing active, just dust. The request was a long shot, a fishing expedition. Weeks passed. The weather cooled. The nation tensed as the rhetoric from Moscow and Washington grew sharper. Donnelly moved on to other files. Then, one afternoon, a low-level surveillance team assigned to a different case, a Soviet diplomatic attaché suspected of being a KGB recruiter, submitted their routine photographic negatives. Donnelly, as part of his longitudinal verification, had requested to be on the routing list for any surveillance near Dynatech. The photos were standard. The attaché entering a coffee shop. The attaché meeting a contact. But one photo, taken from a distance, showed the attaché in a brief, seemingly accidental brush pass in a shopping mall parking lot. The man he brushed past, the man who was now holding a new, thicker newspaper than the one he'd entered with, was Michael Vaughn. It was thin, it was circumstantial, but it was enough. Donnelly now had a thread. The brush pass was the predicate. Arthur Donnelly now had the leverage to move from passive review to active investigation. He convened a small, compartmented meeting with his section chief and a representative from the FBI's Washington field office. He presented his case not as a certainty, but as a high-probability anomaly. The subject, Michael Vaughn, presents with a legend that is procedurally flawless but contextually barren, Donnelly explained, his voice a dry monotone. His polygraph indicates abnormal control. And now, we have a clear, albeit deniable, contact with Mikhail, our known KGB resident at the embassy. The FBI agent, a younger man named Briggs, was skeptical. A brush pass, Arthur? In Tyson's Corner? It's a parking lot, not the Glenica Bridge. Maybe they just bumped into each other. Perhaps, Donnelly replied, lighting his pipe. The smoke filled the small windowless room. But the Soviet is holding Vaughn's Washington Post. And Vaughn is holding the Pravda insert the attaché was carrying. A simple mistake, I'm sure. The room was silent. Permission was granted. Operation Red Tune was formally opened. The name was a cynical reference from a junior analyst, referencing both the suspected Soviet affiliation and the primary absurd clue that would ultimately break the case: the Marlboro Man. The surveillance began in earnest. A full shoebox team, a rotating crew of watchers, was assigned to Vaughn. They followed him from his home to Dynatech. They sat in vans parked down the street, pretending to be utility workers, listening. They bugged his car. They bugged his home. The technical team went in while Michael and Helen were at a community orchestra performance, and in 3 hours the house was live. The first few weeks of intercepts were agonizingly dull. The Vaughns were quiet. They discussed grocery lists. Helen worried about the azaleas. Michael complained about the network latency at work. It was the portrait of a boring, middle-aged American couple. Donnelly listened to the tapes himself, night after night, in his office. He was looking for the slip, the use of a Russian diminutive, a reference to a place that wasn't on their legend. He found nothing. Their tradecraft was perfect. They were Michael and Helen Vaughn, but the physical surveillance team was reporting something else. The garbage run, the analysis of the family's trash, was fruitful. They found the usual detritus of a suburban life, but also, every week, dozens of empty cigarette packs. Always Marlboro Reds. One night, the surveillance team logged an anomalous event. Vaughn, clearly agitated after a long day, pulled into a 7-Eleven. He went in, came out empty-handed, got back in his car, and drove 3 miles to a different convenience store. The watcher on duty noted. Subject appeared agitated. Entered first location, exited. Drove to second location. Purchased one carton cigarettes. Don Donnelly read the report. Why drive to a second store? He dispatched a junior analyst. Go to the 7-Eleven, find out what brand of Marlboro Reds they sell. The analyst returned, perplexed. They sell Marlboro Reds, boss. Hard pack, flip-top box, like everyone else. Donnelly sent him to the second store. The analyst returned an hour later. Same thing, boss. Hard pack. This didn't make sense. The surveillance logs from the garbage runs were re-examined. The analyst who cataloged the trash was brought in. What kind of packs? Donnelly asked. What do you mean? Red. Marlboro. Hard pack or soft pack? The analyst paused. I think soft pack. Yeah, crushed. You know, like in the old movies. Soft pack. Donnelly felt a jolt. He stood up and went to the vending machine in the Langley break room. He bought a pack of Marlboros. It was, as expected, a hard-shell, flip-top box. This was the American standard. The soft pack was still available, but it was becoming a niche product, an affectation, an echo of the past. He called the Berlin station. Get me a market analysis. What's the standard packaging for American cigarettes in Western Europe? And in the East, if you can. Specifically, Marlboro. The answer came back 2 days later via a secure cable. In Europe, the soft pack remains dominant. It is seen as the authentic American packaging. It is the primary style sold in PX and is the most common form on the black market in the Eastern Bloc. It's a status symbol. Hard packs are seen as a new, less desirable variant. Donnelly stared at the cable. Vaughn wasn't just a smoker. He was a smoker with a deep, ingrained preference. A preference he would drive across town to satisfy. A preference that wasn't formed in Columbus, Ohio, in the 1960s. It was a preference formed elsewhere, a place where the soft-pack Marlboro was the only Marlboro. It was a tiny, subconscious comfort, a taste of a home he couldn't acknowledge. It was the first crack in the legend. The man was smoking the wrong kind of freedom. The soft pack was the key. It was the behavioral anomaly that unlocked the rest. It was the tell. Donnelly's team now had a new focus: environmental disruption. If the preference was this strong, it was a vulnerability. The surveillance escalated. They didn't just watch Vaughn. They began to manage his environment. They arranged for the 2 convenience stores near his home to run out of soft packs. A low-level agent simply went in and bought the entire stock every morning. The results were immediate. The surveillance logs, previously mundane, became charged with tension. Subject entered 7-Eleven, exited 30 seconds later, struck steering wheel with fist, proceeded to Safeway, entered, exited, appeared highly agitated. Vaughn's placid, controlled demeanor was cracking, not over matters of state but over 20 cents of paper packaging. This agitation bled into his home life. The audio intercepts, once filled with polite nothings, became strained. "You're pacing, Misha," Helen, Elena, said one night, her voice low. The use of his real name, Misha, was a shocking breach of protocol. The technicians listening on the line flagged it in red. "They are out, Vaughn," Mikhail snapped in English. "Out of what?" "The cigarettes, the right ones. It's the 3rd store." "It is just a habit, Misha. Go to the hard pack. It is no different." "It is different," he hissed. "You know it is. It's wrong. The taste is wrong." Donnelly listened to the tape, a faint grim smile on his face. It wasn't the taste, it was the feel, the ritual, the specific comfort of crushing the soft paper pack in his pocket, a habit learned 3 decades ago and a world away. With this new, validated pressure point, the FBI team, now fully cooperative, expanded their physical search of his office at Dynatech. They didn't find a smoking gun, but they found the ash. In the back of his bottom desk drawer, hidden under a stack of old manuals, they found a small ceramic dish. It was filled with cigarette ash and butts. Vaughn, paranoid about surveillance, had been smoking in his office after hours, a clear violation of company policy, and meticulously hiding the evidence. The forensics team analyzed the ash. Among the standard tobacco, they found traces of a specific, high-cellulose paper, not just from the cigarette but from something else. He was burning his notes. The ashtray wasn't just for his habit, it was his miniature incinerator. The surveillance now had a dual focus. First, track his access at Dynatech. They discovered he was assisting other analysts, using their terminals to access data outside his own clearances. He was accessing naval acoustic signatures and submarine patrol routes. He was a spider, moving quietly through the network. Second, they focused on the Marlboro link. Donnelly, in a moment of grim inspiration, decided to use the cigarettes as a signal. He had an agent posing as a marketing researcher call the Vaughn house. "Hello, Mrs. Vaughn. We're conducting a survey for Philip Morris USA. We see you're a valued customer. We'd like to send your husband a complimentary case of his preferred brand." Helen was, as expected, flawless. "My husband? Oh, he doesn't smoke. It's a dreadful habit. We don't allow it in the house." She hung up. It was a perfect textbook denial. But the surveillance audio told a different story. 2 minutes after the call, the bugs picked up the sound of Mikhail and Elena having a frantic, whispered argument in the basement, in Russian. The researcher call was a clear, unambiguous signal. "We know who you are. We know what you smoke." The signal had been sent. The call from the marketing researcher was a calculated move, an old counterintelligence game. It was designed to spook the target, to force him out of his routine, to make him reach for his emergency protocols. Mikhail Voronin, alias Michael Vaughn, was a professional. He had been trained at the S Directorate's elite academy. He recognized the signal. The call wasn't a random survey. It was a message. They knew. But what did they know? Did they know about the Navy yeoman he was running at Norfolk? Did they know about the acoustic data? Or was it just the cigarettes? The absurdity of it gnawed at him. His behavior changed instantly. The surveillance audio from the house went dead. He and Helen stopped speaking, communicating only with prearranged gestures or notes that were immediately destroyed. He stopped his after-hours work at Dynatech. He followed his routine with a rigid, desperate precision. He even, in a conspicuous bit of theater for any watchers, bought a pack of Marlboro Lights, hardpack. He smoked one, grimaced, and threw the pack away. He was preparing his exfiltration. Arthur Donnelly watched the data streams. Vaughn had stopped accessing the sensitive data. He had missed a scheduled dead drop with the Navy yeoman. He was going to ground, cleaning his tracks, preparing to bolt. "He's going to run," Briggs, the FBI man, stated. "We need to pick him up, and his wife." Donnelly shook his head. "No, not yet. If we pick him up now, he's just a systems analyst who looked at the wrong files. He'll lawyer up. His network, the yeoman, and whoever else he's running, gets away. His wife walks. We need to force his hand in a way that burns the entire operation." "How?" "We don't confront the spy," Donnelly said, tamping tobacco into his pipe. "We confront the man. We take away his last comfort." The confrontation was not a high-speed chase. It was, like the rest of the case, quiet, psychological, and mundane. It happened at a dry cleaner. Vaughn went to the same one every Saturday morning. Donnelly, who had not met his target face-to-face, decided to be there. Donnelly was in line, holding a single, wrinkled trench coat. Vaughn entered, his face gray with stress. He handed his ticket to the clerk, his eyes scanning the street, the other customers. He was a man in a cage. Donnelly stepped back, accidentally, bumping into him. "Oh, excuse me. Awful day out." Vaughn grunted, not making eye contact. "You know," Donnelly said conversationally, looking at the rack of clothes, "it's the little things that get you, the habits. My father, he smoked. Couldn't stand those new flip-top boxes. Said they ruined the taste. He'd drive all over town looking for the old soft packs. Said they were the only real ones. The European ones." Vaughn froze. He didn't turn. He didn't flinch, but the surveillance photos from the agent across the street would later show that the knuckles on his right hand, gripping the plastic countertop, had turned white. He paid for his cleaning, a single suit, and walked out without a word. The confrontation was over. It had lasted less than 30 seconds. When Vaughn got to his car, the surveillance team following him noted a significant change. He did not drive home. He drove to a hardware store and purchased 2 large suitcases. Then he drove to his bank and made a large cash withdrawal, just under the $10,000 federal reporting limit. The game was on. The confrontation had worked. Vaughn was now activating his emergency escape plan. He knew he was compromised, and he knew specifically how they had found him. The man in the dry cleaner had all but told him. The exfiltration plan was classic S-Directorate procedure. A vacation. Mikhail and Helen spent a Sunday packing. The housebugs picked up the sounds of closets being emptied, the rustle of cash being counted, the low, tense murmurs. They weren't speaking, but the sounds told the story. Their plan was simple. Drive north to Montreal. The Canadian border checks were notoriously lax for American citizens. Once in Montreal, they would make contact with the Soviet consulate, declare their identity, and be exfiltrated back to Moscow. The surveillance teams were on high alert. A mobile command post, disguised as a landscaping truck, was parked 2 streets over. The FBI had units ready to deploy on any highway heading north out of Virginia. Monday morning, 5:15 a.m. The garage door of the Vaughn house opened. The gray Ford sedan, its trunk heavy, pulled out. Mikhail was driving. Helen was in the passenger seat. They looked like any other couple getting an early start on their vacation. They headed north on I-95. The surveillance team, in 3 separate, nondescript cars, kept a loose box around them. They let him run. They wanted him to feel safe, to follow his plan. They needed the act of fleeing. Fleeing was a confession. The car passed the D.C. Beltway. It crossed into Maryland. "He's committed," Briggs said from the command van. "Let's take him." "Not yet," Donnelly's voice crackled over the radio. "Let him buy his going-away present." Donnelly was not in the van. He was 100 miles north at the Chesapeake House Service Plaza on I-95 in Maryland. It was the largest rest stop on the route, a natural, predictable stopping point for gas and coffee before the long drive. At 7:03 a.m., the gray Ford sedan's blinker came on. It pulled off the highway and into the sprawling parking lot of the service plaza. Vaughn got out of the car, stretching his back. He said something to Helen, then began walking toward the main building, the Gas Food Gift Emporium. Donnelly was waiting, standing by the entrance reading a USA Today. Vaughn walked past him and went straight to the large cigarette kiosk, the kind that sells by the carton. He pointed. The clerk nodded. Vaughn wanted a carton, the ultimate symbol of his escape. The clerk turned to get it. Vaughn scanned the store. His eyes met Donnelly's. Donnelly folded his newspaper and put it under his arm. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Vaughn understood. The man from the dry cleaner was here. It was a trap. This was the end. His shoulders slumped. All the tension, the years of performance, the anxiety of the last 48 hours drained away. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He turned to the clerk. "Never mind," he said, his voice quiet. He walked out of the store. As he reached the sidewalk, two dark blue sedans, the kind the federal government buys by the thousand, pulled up, blocking his path back to the Ford. Two FBI agents stepped out of one. Arthur Donnelly stepped out of the other. "Michael," Donnelly said, his voice calm, not a trace of triumph, "I think you've had a long enough drive." From the other car, two female agents were already approaching the Ford, where Helen sat, staring straight ahead, her hands folded in her lap, waiting for the inevitable. The arrest was quiet, professional, and entirely without drama. Just another Monday morning at a highway rest stop. Michael Vaughn was taken to The Farm, a secure CIA facility in rural Virginia. He was not, in the legal sense, arrested. He was detained. The FBI had Helen. Michael was CIA property. This was an intelligence matter, not a criminal one. The room was bland. Beige walls, a solid table, two chairs, a one-way mirror. The air smelled of stale coffee. Michael sat, his suit jacket removed, his hands on the table. He had been offered food, which he refused. He had asked for a cigarette, which was denied. He was a professional. He knew the drill. He would say nothing. He would wait for his government to demand his return. Arthur Donnelly entered, holding a single file. He sat opposite Michael. He did not open the file. He pulled out his pipe and his leather tobacco pouch. "We can do this in English or Russian, Michael. It's your preference." Michael remained silent. His face was a mask of placid indifference. "All right, English it is," Donnelly said, methodically packing his pipe. "Let's review the facts. You are Mikhail Semyonovich Voronin, Colonel, S. Directorate, KGB. You were inserted into the United States in 1965 via Canada with a manufactured legend. For 20 years, you have been Michael Vaughn. You have been, by all accounts, extremely successful. The Navy yeoman at Norfolk was a particularly impressive piece of work. The acoustic data you compromised will set our anti-submarine warfare program back 5 years. Your superiors will be very pleased." Mikhail's expression did not change. "But you're human, Mikhail," Donnelly continued, striking a match. He puffed the pipe to life. The sweet smell of Cavendish filled the room. And humans have habits. They have needs. Little rituals they can't shed, no matter how good the training. Donnelly reached into his pocket and pulled out an object. It wasn't the file. It was an empty, crumpled red and white cigarette pack. A soft pack. He placed it on the table between them. "This," Donnelly said, tapping the pack. "This is what it came down to. Not the satellites, not the encryption, not the polygraphs. This. Your preference for a product." Mikhail's eyes, for the first time, focused on the object. His gaze was intense. You were trained to be an Ohioan, but you smoked like a Berliner. You adopted the iconography of American freedom, the Marlboro Man, but you adopted the wrong version of it. The version they sold to you, in Moscow, as a status symbol. The version you learned to crave. You couldn't get it at the 7-Eleven, so you drove across town. You couldn't find it, so you got angry. You got angry, and your wife called you Misha. And we heard it. Donnelly leaned forward. Your entire meticulous 20-year legend, your wife's flawless cover, the network you built, all of it undone by a soft pack of cigarettes. Mikhail looked at the pack. He looked at Donnelly's smoking pipe. The craving, the stress, the decades of pressure finally coalesced. He didn't confess. He didn't offer secrets. He didn't break down. He simply asked, in a voice thick with a Russian accent he had not used in 20 years, "What happens to Elena?" "That," said Donnelly, "depends on what you tell us about Norfolk." Mikhail leaned back. The mask was gone. He was no longer Michael Vaughn, the American analyst. He was Mikhail Voronin, the Soviet colonel, captured. And he knew the rules of the game. "I need a cigarette," Mikhail said. Donnelly reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a fresh sealed pack of Marlboro Reds. He slid it across the table. It was a hard pack. The fallout from the exposure of Mikhail Voronin was immediate, though almost entirely invisible to the public. The Navy yeoman in Norfolk was arrested in a quiet pre-dawn raid, his case handled by the Judge Advocate General's Corps. He was facing a court-martial for espionage, a fact that never made the national papers. Dynatech Solutions lost its contract with the Navy. The company collapsed within 6 months, a victim of a security breach it never understood. Hundreds of people lost their jobs, collateral damage in a war they didn't know they were fighting. For Mikhail and Elena, the future was bureaucratic. They were high-value assets. They were not common criminals. They were state property. Elena, Helen Vaughn, was held by the FBI. Her debriefing was short. She was a professional. She gave them nothing but the legend she had lived for 20 years. She knew nothing, she claimed, of her husband's other life. It was a practiced, believable performance. Mikhail was debriefed by Arthur Donnelly and a team from the CIA for months. He was a cooperative subject, in that he understood the transactional nature of his position. He gave them information, but only information he knew they could already verify. He confirmed the existence of networks they already suspected. He gave them old tradecraft, old codes. He was trading his past for his wife's future. The deal was struck in the winter of 1984. Elena Voronina was declared persona non grata and quietly deported. She was part of a low-level diplomatic exchange in Berlin, a swapped businessman for a cultural attaché. She vanished back into the Soviet Union. Mikhail remained in administrative detention at a CIA safe house. His value had not yet been fully expended. He was the grand prize, a captured KGB colonel, an illegal of the highest order. He would be saved for a bigger trade. Arthur Donnelly received a commendation, a small unsigned plaque from the director, praising his diligence and analytical rigor. He was not promoted. He was, in fact, viewed with a new suspicion by his superiors. He had been right, which was, in the world of intelligence bureaucracy, an unforgivable sin. He had proven that the old, patient human methods were still superior to the multi-million-dollar satellite systems. He was given a new, thankless task, reviewing the files of every contractor with SCI access. It was his victory and his punishment. The personal tragedy of the Vaughns was a footnote. Their house in Arlington was sold. The neighbors remarked that they had moved away suddenly, perhaps to a new job in a different city. Their quiet, perfect American life was erased as if it had never been. Years passed. The Cold War, which had seemed so permanent in 1983, began to thaw, crack, and then shatter with astonishing speed. The Berlin Wall fell in 1989. The Soviet Union itself dissolved in 1991. The evil empire was no more. Arthur Donnelly retired in 1990. He lived in the same house in Virginia, tending his roses. He read the newspapers with a kind of detached irony. The great conflict that had defined his entire life, his entire being, had ended not with a bang, but with a bureaucratic collapse. The files he had so meticulously built, the networks he had tracked, were now just history, irrelevant footnotes. Mikhail Voronin had been traded. His day came on February 11, 1986, long before the end. He was the centerpiece of a major spy exchange, the one that famously included the dissident Natan Sharansky. He walked across the Glienicke Bridge in Berlin, a bridge connecting the West to the East. The news footage of the event is grainy. It shows Sharansky walking to freedom, a moment of high human drama. But for those who knew where to look, another figure was walking the other way, a man in a borrowed suit, his face impassive, walking into the fog of East Germany. That was Mikhail. Donnelly had watched the footage on a small TV in his office. He watched the man he had caught, the man whose life he had unraveled, walk back to his masters. In 1992, with the Cold War over, Donnelly, now a civilian consultant, took a trip to the new, chaotic Russian Federation. He was part of a delegation advising the new government on security structures. It was a strange, surreal experience. In Moscow, at a reception, he met a man, a consultant, from the new Russian security service, the FSB, which had risen from the KGB's ashes. The man was older, his hair white, but his eyes were the same. It was Mikhail Voronin. They stood by a window overlooking the Moscow River. "You look well, Arthur," Mikhail said in his perfect, unaccented English. "You too, Mikhail. They are treating you well?" Mikhail shrugged. The world has changed. The rules are different. He had been a hero, then a prisoner, then a traded asset. Now, in the new Russia, he was a relic, a man with skills for a game no one was playing. "Elena?" Donnelly asked. "She did not adjust well. She passed away. The change was too much for her." They stood in silence. "Do you know," Mikhail said, a faint bitter smile on his lips, "when I returned, they debriefed me. They wanted to know every detail. How did they catch you? What was the failure in your tradecraft?" "What did you tell them?" "I told them the truth." Mikhail reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a red and white pack of cigarettes. He tapped one out and offered it to Donnelly. It was a soft pack. "I told them," Mikhail said, "that I was undone by an American icon." Donnelly looked at the cigarette but did not take it. "It wasn't the icon, Mikhail. It was the habit." Mikhail put the cigarette to his own lips, lit it, and inhaled deeply. Habit, preference, identity. In the end, they are all the same thing. This case, the Red Tune file, became a quiet legend within the agency, a training seminar staple. It was not a story of technological marvels or daring field operations. It was a case study in the power of the mundane. It was a reminder that the great edifice of espionage, with all its high stakes and geopolitical weight, rests on a foundation of human frailty. The Cold War was not merely a conflict of ideologies or weapon systems. It was a war of details. It was a competition to see who could manufacture the more convincing, normal life. Mikhail Voronin was a master of the grand deception, but he was a failure in the small ones. He could fake a 20-year life, but he could not fake a brand preference. His downfall was an irony of globalization. The very product that America exported as a symbol of its cultural dominance, the Marlboro Man, the taste of freedom, was the instrument of his capture. He had embraced the symbol, but his training had given him the wrong version of it, the European export version. He was caught in a gap of consumer brand identity. For Arthur Donnelly, the case was a final, grim validation of his worldview. He had always believed that counterintelligence was not about finding evil, it was about finding discrepancies. It was a slow, patient, thankless task of finding the one piece of data that did not fit. In a world of perfect legends, the only truth is in the error. The only honesty is in the habit. The story of Michael Vaughn is not a tragedy of state secrets, but a personal tragedy of identity. He was a man who lived his entire adult life in service to an idea, only to be betrayed by a craving, a small sensory memory of home that he could not or would not erase. He was the perfect spy, undone by the imperfect man. Thank you for joining us for this narrative. If you find these hidden histories compelling, your support for the channel is always appreciated.